Greetings, greenhouse people, and welcome to another installment of Tech on Demand, where our goal is always to bring you tips, tricks, and information to select and produce your best crops ever. I'm your host, Bill Calkins, and I'm happy to be joined by someone with a great deal of experience in greenhouse heating, environmental management, control systems, retrofitting, installation of greenhouse equipment, and so much more. My guest is honestly one of the most knowledgeable people I know in our industry, and that is no exaggeration. Jim Rearden is the president of BioTherm and has dedicated more than 45 years to the horticulture industry. With a wealth of experience and a deep understanding of horticultural practices, Jim has played a pivotal role in advancing BioTherm's mission. His leadership and commitment to the field have been instrumental in fostering innovation and sustainability within the company. Jim's work continues to support the growth and development of horticulture. Today, Jim and I are going to talk about a new partnership for BioTherm that brings some product lines into their portfolio, including low-mass boilers and new modern unit heaters, but that's not all. I also asked Jim about the evolution of greenhouse environmental management, how grower needs continue to change based on many factors, the importance of planning ahead when making equipment decisions, and what the future may hold in terms of regulation and legislation that's bound to impact our industry. It's a great conversation, and I hope you stick around to the end because the good info keeps coming. But that's enough out of me. Let's get into it. Jim, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you very much.
So before we jump into the topic of the day, I have to ask, because every time I read about BioTherm, the story always starts somewhere along the lines of Jim Rearden started the company when he was 18 years old, and it has that whole teenager tinkering in his garage, starts a tech company that takes over the world whole vibe. So is this a true story? And why were you at 18 doing this instead of racing dirt bikes or chasing girls or something?
Oh, I did plenty of that on the side for sure. But no, it was actually a summer job right after high school that I got. And it was a couple neighbor guys that started the company. I didn't start the company. I ended up buying the company a few years later. But it was in 1980, and I lived across the street from a couple guys that had started what they called an agricultural solar company. That was their goal. They hadn't sold anything. They were just starting out, but they did secure a distribution agreement for a company that made something that's similar to what we call our BioTherm microclimate system. Now it was a series of little rubber tubes that could be used for collecting solar energy as well as distributing the energy, so that it would be like a two-trick pony where it could absorb as a unglazed collector on a roof or some other structure, and then it could store that energy up, and then that same hot water energy could then be redistributed into floor heating or other things. Like the office we had then was part of a garage. We actually put the tubing underneath the sheetrock, and so we were kind of casting about looking for things to do, and their focus was on ag. So we live in an area here in Northern California that has a lot of poultry production. And The first project we ever sold was a replacement for traditional brooders, the things that hang above baby turkeys to keep them warm. And it was the early 80s, and solar was a big deal. And so this company was, a game to try it. And so, one of my first projects was I built all these frames with a bunch of tubing in it, and we had insulation above it, and we lowered them down above the turkeys. And I think in the first 2 months, we killed something like 150,000 turkeys, baby turkeys.
Oh, wow.
That job did not go well.
No.
It was around that same time that one of the partners that started the company was driving through Half Moon Bay, California, and he just happened to drop off some literature on these products to, unfortunately, a defunct large commercial greenhouse called Bay City Flower Company. And about a week later, we were little entrepreneurs sitting around what are we going to do next, guys? The turkeys didn't work out. And the phone rang, and it was Bay City Flower Company saying, we'd love to try your root zone heating system. And we kind of said, sure. And so I spent 2.5 months of my own time down there knitting together all this tubing and all these little Quonset houses. and it worked great. We used little hot water heaters in every house, and they reported back and said, "Oh boy, our plants, we got extra crops and we had less diseases and all these things." So that's really what kicked us off into the commercial greenhouse industry. We've never really looked back. That's been, besides some little forays into heating and cooling golf greens, which we still do as a side kind of business, and doing some other things like farrowing pens for hogs and things. That's been our whole legacy is just doing what we can to make a better environment in horticulture.
No, that's cool. Okay.
Yeah.
Well, that, I can sleep better now knowing that whole story and that it is true and not just something to put in the magazines. No, that's really cool.
If you look at my LinkedIn, all I can have is I worked in an ice cream parlor, I worked in a shop, and I've done BioTherm for 45 years.
Oh, that's awesome. Well, good. Well, it sounds like you're the right guy to talk to then.
Yeah.
So how do you, I guess, along those lines, a perfect segue into a question that I wanted to take an opportunity to ask you while I had you here is, how do you characterize the whole evolution of the market in the products and way that we approach greenhouse environments over the last 40 years? And I know that's a huge question, and I'm going to ask you to sort of summarize it quickly, but what does that story look like?
Yeah, I'll go fast. I mean, when I started in the early 80s, it was very common that when people would build or renovate a greenhouse, that they would spend 80% of the money on the structure and about 20% of the money on the things that made the climate work. And generally, it was embodied in maybe a step controller and maybe a jet fan and a unit heater. And that was kind of it. They didn't really have much else that was being done. There were some, hot water systems out there, but it was not the most common thing. And so now, and as time has progressed, I think that has gotten to the inverse now, where the structure accounts for a much smaller part of the build or renovation budget, and it's more like 80-20 the other way. And I think it's because people have really started fine tuning what the plant's true environment is. I mean, everything from, the automation of the controlled environment that didn't exist, and it was all, mechanical thermostats, et cetera. So the evolution of computers going in, and then, with that, they could monitor exactly what was going on in the different layers of the greenhouse, for lack of a better term. And so, I think that's, been part of the change has been, there's a lot more mechanization in the system in the greenhouses now. There's a lot more automation. There's obviously more lighting being done, the shading, curtain, energy retention. And then with regard to heating, I think people are paying much more attention to, root zone temperatures. And so it's the complexity of doing a greenhouse it's been a lot more elaborate now.
And is that do you think that's been driven by the technology, or has it been driven by the research into what the plants need, or does it go hand in hand?
I think hand in hand. I think that they're trying to always maximize production per square foot. Yeah. And there's, our partners at universities are always coming out with interesting things. Like, I remember early on when the term diff was invented, when they started controlling plant height based on changing temperatures, which required some automation. So I think it's hand in hand. And I don't think any technology really will take off if it doesn't have an economic benefit to the grower. So,
right.
I think it's
okay. No, that makes sense. And you and BioTherm have been working with growers for decades, obviously. How has your approach changed? Have grower needs changed in terms of the products or the support that they require from a company like yours?
Absolutely. We, started as the guys that do the little tubes on the table or the little tubes on the floor. And then as things have progressed, we've really enhanced what we offer in kind of trying to embrace the entire environment. So after I bought the company in 89, I think, me and the partner I have now, Mike Moko, we set an initiative that we'd come out with something new to address something we were hearing from the field every year if we could. And so we started enhancing our product offerings with things like our heating pipes that go under bench when they had mobile trays, because someone would put in mobile tray system and the little tubing system wouldn't work for that because the benches actually go in and out of the greenhouse. So we had to develop things like dual fin and star fin. Then people started saying, well, I have this hot water system. I'd really like to melt the snow off my greenhouse. And so we started putting star fin up in the upper reaches of the greenhouse and, doing a lot more zoning of not just greenhouse to greenhouse, but root zone to air temperature, things like that. And then starting to do systems that were integrating, controlling the irrigation and water temperature from the boilers. So they always have warm water to irrigate with. So yeah, the growers' needs have been in lockstep with their cultural needs, and their investments have followed trying to maximize production per square foot. We got into the flood floor business in 2000 because of that. And, because growers are selling for the big boxes, needed to really control their labor. And so we, with a flood floor system, get their irrigation really under control and really reduce the head count of employees they had in there. So yeah, our systems, we built from that kernel of like a really cool innovation that we came up in the early 80s. And that business is still there. It's probably about 15% of what we do every year, but now we're doing a lot of big like CO2 recapture systems and things like that from our boilers. So we're trying to make, optimize the environment every way we can for what the plants care about.
That's cool. And that mission of a new product every year is aggressive, but that's cool. And that probably keeps you having fun and looking for new innovation as everywhere you go.
Yeah. And because our industry is really, for us, like Mecca is kind of Holland, right? They've really, they've had the most stringent environments. They've had the most difficult, costs of energy, et cetera. And we go over there 2-3 times a year. We really try to pay attention to what's going on in the world, but then we bring things home to the US and realize our geography is different. So we try to, what we call is democratize solutions that are similar to what the most enlightened growers on the planet get, but understanding that we have growers spread out all. I call our industry like Mayberry, spread it over the whole country. Geography makes a difference in how we deploy some of the solutions.
That's true. That's true.
Yeah.
So if you think about 40 plus years, starting with little drip tubes and moving to, you mentioned all sorts of things from CO2 to the flood floors and all sorts of environmental controls. How has like the product line evolved over the years? Have products come and gone? Have you just continued to add? What does that look like over the course of a timeline?
Oh yeah. From regulation on how, because we sell a lot of hot water systems that require boiler equipment to make that hot water. And that's been really dynamic. In the first 10, 15 years of our business, there was almost no regulation on the kind of pollution or, emissions that came out of the stack of boilers. That's been, federally and on state and municipal levels changed a lot. So the products have evolved a lot to be able to be compliant with the requirements of those different regions, the needs of the growers. And we try to, we consider ourselves tool makers. And so we aren't growers, but we try to listen to our clients and with a keen ear, and because it seems like that's where we can really derive what's needed next. And we're not on that pace of new product every year anymore. Our business has gone from being like the root zone heating guys to the full climate control guys. We have a factory here where we build complete boiler systems and then knock them down and ship them across the country so that we can address the fact that maybe they don't have the local welders that you would be blessed with if you're in the Westlands of Holland, those kinds of things. And our systems have gone from, it used to be a big job for us was 10, 20,000 square feet. Now we're doing 5-10 acres at a time. And so, we've gotten much more involved in turnkey type solutions where we bring the labor to bear on the project and those kinds of things to make them more of a complete solution for people.
That's a lot of evolution, and you're right. The job size, everything from the job size to the technology. I like the idea of tool makers as a way to think about what you guys do, because that does mean that you have to study up on who's using those tools and how they're going to use them as well. That's I like that.
Yeah,
like
growers are honest. Do something wrong, they'll tell you, and then you change it, and they appreciate it.
True. That's true. As long as you're listening and changing, it's okay to get things wrong. So one of the new partnerships you wanted to talk about is with a company that manufactures low mass boilers. And you, as we were preparing for this, you did explain that a little bit and sent over some resources, which I looked at. And I will say I didn't I didn't understand all of it, but it does some of the reasons why you'd move to a system like this makes a lot of sense. So can you talk a little bit about the manufacturer and why this partnership makes sense for BioTherm, and then move into kind of explaining to the listeners the benefits of a low mass boiler and how this new technology makes a lot of sense for greenhouses?
Absolutely. Yeah. So, I think, for one of your sister publications is the Red Book, and then I've been, had the opportunity, through Chris Beatty's to do some chapters in there. And in that, I did a lot of research and found out, like the first greenhouse that was heated with hot water was in the, early 1800s. And, making hot water back then was usually burning wood or coal or something like that, and using cast iron or steel to build the heat exchange part of it, where the energy gets into the water or steam. Through like the Industrial Revolution here, et cetera, the ways that boilers were generally designed was using those kinds of metals. And early on in the time arc of biotherm, we found that there were what they call low mass boilers, which made a lot of sense to us because they are made of what I call more noble metals like stainless steel and copper, things that are much more higher heat transfer ability. And they pack a lot of energy into a small format, but the technology for those really has been long time coming. And up until a few years ago, like the biggest piece of equipment that was in that what we call low mass was something that could heat maybe a half of an acre. So it was maybe a 2 million type device. And through more, technology and burner technology and everything over the last 5-10 years, that the style of boiler, the low mass boiler that we can offer now, is up to 10 million BTUs, which is about 2.5 acres in cold country. And what's nice about this technology, as opposed to what people think of as a traditional boiler, because when you think of a boiler in a greenhouse, you kind of think of the locomotive style device that's probably built out of steel. With these units, they can work in what we call on demand instead of the always on kind of mode. And a lot of growers are still running the high mass boilers that are basically, they turn them on seasonally. They can't react to the changes as quickly as this low mass technology. And the low mass boilers, basically they run whenever there's a call for heat, not all the time. They really like to run at lower water temperatures too. So, and really, if you think about a greenhouse, it's the biggest low mass structure ever built. They're very transient to what's going on outside. That's insulated very well. So as far as like equipment that makes sense for greenhouses, this kind of boiler really is a good handshake with the way the dynamics of a greenhouse work, because when a zone calls for heat, it turns on, but it's not just sitting there waiting for the load to come, because they're very quick in reacting. A good comparison is like a 10 million BTU traditional boiler might have about 1,000 gallons of water in it. These new boilers only have about 50 gallons in them.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
So that seems to be much more efficient if you're only running it when you need it versus turning it on for the season and leaving it on. So is that translate to cost savings as well?
It does. Yeah. So you don't have the parasitic losses from the jacket and up the stack, through the time when it's not running. And when it is on, we're generally seeing with these boilers, we can get up to 99% efficiency fuel conversion, so that the energy that is made actually goes into the system. And so it's not uncommon for people to install these. We're doing a lot of projects where we're retrofitting the older style equipment now that we have the bigger capacities, and people enjoy 15 to 25% energy savings as a pretty common thing.
Yeah, that's a big deal. That's real money right there for sure.
It really makes a lot of sense. It's easier to work on. They look like file cabinets. Calling them a boiler is almost a misnomer, because they're more just a hot water machine.
Do you need to have a technician come in and work on them, or is this something that folks at the greenhouse can do some of the minor maintenance themselves?
Yeah. So when we do a project, we commission the boilers with our own team. And then we train up the internal team at the greenhouse facility. If they don't have that, we have partners all over the country that can be assigned to them, so we can handle the regional problems that might come up where they might need, because boilers always seem to fail on New Year's Eve, or giving. The other nice thing is that generally when we're doing, especially the larger applications, we will put in, instead of just one boiler to handle the load, we might put in 2 or 3 that are ganged together, and they have a built-in redundancy that way. So, a boiler out situation may only be characterized by a little bit less heat, but not a complete outage. So,
Okay.
and they work together, like they have logic that makes them work together and sequence and cycle on and off so that they meet the load appropriately. So that's, we're really sensitive to the fact these are mission critical systems.
Mhm.
And this kind of approach with a modular high efficiency boiler is gaining a lot of popularity.
Cool. Well, then I guess for the listeners, if you've looked into low mass boilers, or if you need, if you want to learn more, definitely go to the BioTherm website. I'll put links in the show notes. There's a lot of information on these systems that you can get yourself kind of up to speed, and then definitely reach out to one of their experts. And
Yeah.
then while we're talking about new product lines, you guys also have a new line of greenhouse unit heaters. We all know that a lot of greenhouses use unit heaters.
Yeah.
And the company that you're partnering with, I think, is Sterling. So why don't you tell us about that and what you think these new sort of higher tech heaters can do for growers and especially for the crop?
Yes. Yeah. So it's an interesting thing. There's the company that makes the boilers for us is called RBI, and they're
Mhm.
built in Ontario. They're built in Mississauga, Ontario, and they're the first people who have really brought them into the sizes that we need and capacity for the greenhouse industry. They're owned by the same group that owns Sterling unit heater manufacturing. And the company is called Mestek, Mestek. And they approached us a couple of years ago and said, we've really always wanted to get into the greenhouse industry. We believe now that we have some very powerful and appropriate solutions for that. And we want to partner with BioTherm to deploy those and get them known and out in the field. So it's been a great partnership that's only existed now for, I think we're in 14, 15 months now. And along with the new boiler technology, they brought their leading edge of unit heaters. Unit heaters are kind of a commodity. A lot of people, it's just a box that makes hot air, blah, 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 blah. But it is, it's also, you could see it as like a money grinder, because every time that thing runs, it's using fuel, right? So if you characterize it like a car, your greenhouse, you want the highest MPG you can get. And Sterling has brought out a 2 real good levels of appropriate solutions for unit heaters. One being their basic efficiency standard unit heaters, which are typically 80 to 83% efficiency. But they have innovated what they call the ag unit, or the unit they've designed specifically for the greenhouse application, where they've coated them with a real leading edge coating and I'm going to forget the acronym, but it's ZAM coating. And that coating is something that will last in the greenhouse environment for decades. If it gets scratched, it actually heals. It's a really interesting technology. So the case of the unit, the part that we all see, lasts a long time. And all the internals are also very robust and designed for greenhouse applications and for a long haul. So that's part of the big agenda they have. And then for the higher efficiency, other manufacturers have been on the scene with what we call high efficiency unit heaters that are up to 93, 94% efficiency. The other manufacturers in the market have their biggest units are still locked in around 310,000 input. And Sterling has their products at 400,000 input, which really opens up some opportunities for growers. And they've taken their time to enter the market. They've known about the greenhouse market. They've done a couple forays over the last decade or so, but now they're very serious about really trying to make inroads, because between the moderate efficiency unit that has that coating on it and the robust guts, and then the high efficiency, I think they've proven to us and a lot of customers in the last 2 years that it really is a great solution to consider.
That's cool. And how many of these have been installed in greenhouses?
I'd say we're probably in the realm of 500 to 800.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. I mean, that's still a good number.
Yeah.
Cool. Oh, that actually,
They're new
the
in the game.
coating and the fact that it's, I guess, purpose built for greenhouse environments is really interesting and definitely something that I think will appeal to growers. When they hear that, there's a little more confidence in a product.
Yeah, and also the competition generally has language in their warranty where they say, if it's used in a greenhouse, the warranty is compromised. And Sterling is approaching the market very transparently saying, no, it's got the same warranty even if you hang it in a greenhouse. So that's some comfort that people can take in investing in that.
For sure. And then it also makes sense as that's the kind of company that you guys at BioTherm would want to partner with because you understand the greenhouse environment and want to be able to stand behind the products that you're distributing.
Right, exactly. And just the culture of that company. Usually when I partner up with somebody, I learned a long time ago, don't just go for the shiny thing. Make sure that the team behind it is kind of wired like we are. And we have a really special, unique industry where people really have integrity and people don't suffer corporate doublespeak very well when it comes to taking care of things. Our experience with Sterling so far, because there have been a couple of deployment problems, there's been a couple of things out there. They just step right up and make the problems go away. They're great people to work with. So that's that's a good thing.
Definitely sounds good. So when you think about, and I'm sure you've worked with hundreds, probably thousands of growers on upgrading greenhouse equipment, whether that's retrofits or just coming in and overhauling older equipment. So these things tend to be huge investments. So when you work with greenhouses, should owners wait until the equipment starts breaking down or try to get ahead of it and be proactive? I know this is like I'm leading you on this question, right? But I know you have advice because I'm sure you've seen it done both ways.
I have. Yeah, I think that the most successful growers out there are constantly investing in and monitoring efficiency. I've seen way too many legacy operators just get pulled under by the millstone of having equipment that was good 20 years ago that's still working, but not giving them the best shot at the bottom line of profit. And given that energy is typically about the second expense on the highest expense of operating a greenhouse, it's something that really should always be paid attention to. And as technology has changed and as, the evolution of new things out there to make the environment right, growers should really pay attention to that. Our company does offer what we call an energy assessment program where we kind of give a litmus of how your energy is how well you're using your energy, like where your seasonal efficiency for your climate conditioning is per year. And it's not a true energy audit, but it's pretty darn accurate. And so I would recommend that people take a look at that every couple, 3 years and see where they fall out. If you've got unit heaters you invested in, 10, 12 years ago, they're probably kind of on their way out anyway. But even if they're only 5 or 6 years old, moving to the high efficiency, you get another 10% efficiency and the payback might be there. There's also all kinds of grants and incentives that people can avail themselves of. And, it's dry stuff. You got to fill out paperwork and everything else. But a lot of states, utilities, and municipalities have programs that offset the cost of reinvesting in those kinds of things, whether it be high efficiency boilers or high efficiency unit heaters. In California, especially where, it's one of the better states as far as being able to find those kinds of things, but there's dollars available. We're able in some cases to get 100% of the labor and the cost of the equipment covered by special funds from the utility. It just takes some exploration about what's available in your particular area, but staying on top of it is huge. It's tough. It's tough if you build, if you got a big range and you've got a couple 100,000 square feet, you might think you're doing a good job and you may not know it, so having kind of a litmus check by a company like ours every once in a while is a good idea.
That makes so much sense.
And we do that for free too. We all we ask for is 12 months of energy bills. And then we just look at the envelope and what temperatures they're trying to hold. We look at the weather patterns and it'll throw out basically a scorecard that says, you're good or you're not so good. And this is probably the amount of money you're leaving on the table. And that's a really helpful process for people.
And how, if somebody wants to, go through that process, that audit or assessment, how do they do that? Do they just reach out to you through website or is this?
Yeah, we have, they can call the 800 GET heat line. They can reach out to the website, which I'm sure you'll include in this. Regional sales people are trained up on it. It's a pretty easy task. We're not asking for too much information. They just have to dig up how much fuel they don't even have to tell us how much the fuel costs. They just need to tell us over this period of time, I use this many gallons of propane, this many gallons of oil, this many therms. And then most times nowadays with satellite, Google and all this stuff, we can even get a real handle on the envelope without having to visit the site, although we can easily visit the site too. And then basically they get I can send you a sample document, but they get basically a report card that has like a thermometer thing on it saying, growers like you are typically here, and it just tells them about where they're at and about how much money they're potentially wasting in trying to move their environment.
No, I think that makes a lot of sense. And I know that when we talk about big investments in equipment and systems, ROI and payback always are part of the discussion. I know I'm not going to ask you to go like product by product, but how do you approach that discussion with growers when you start a project or when they're looking at where they can get the most bang for their buck?
Yeah. We're real sensitive to the fact that most growers like to see a return on investment in, generally 5 to 7 years max. That's there's other solutions they could put in sometimes and a lot of times we'll tell people like, you should put a thermal blanket in, now that should be your first thing. We don't even sell thermal blankets. So a lot of times, we'll try to give them a prescription of a migration path to getting their efficiency in tune. So, but yeah, we do a lot of energy modeling here. And if it doesn't make sense, we tell people, hey, it doesn't make sense. Or, but like if putting in a good heating system, that doesn't just move the needle on energy savings. It also moves the needle on quality of plants, plant production, right, less disease, things like that. So there's a lot of things to kind of build into that model but in general, that's kind of the time frame that we're trying to work it toward. Because in general, what you want is like, if they have to finance it, we want to make sure that the savings eclipse whatever their cost of financing is.
Right. No, that makes sense. And then, I mean, I think that, yeah, you're right. Because the plant quality, the plant health is got to be something you factor in. And then I was even thinking about like employee happiness, like a nice environment. I mean, it does go a long way to retention, to keeping good team members.
Yeah,
I got to
that's why
believe
we
that.
do a lot of floor heating in service head house buildings, labor areas, because people tend to be happier when they have warm feet.
It's true. It's a
And
really
it's a
good
drier
point.
floor. They don't slip as much because there's no algae growing on it, things like that. Yeah, all that stuff. There's a lot of good things about doing the climate right.
That's true. That's true. All right. As we wrap up a little bit, I want you to take out your crystal ball, which really isn't a crystal ball because you've been doing this for a long time. So it's more like your expertise and longevity looking at these systems. But what does our industry's future look like as it relates to greenhouse equipment, climate systems, and controls? I mean, you already mentioned regulations changing with boilers and the need to sort of be cognizant of the environment when planning systems like this. But I know there's legislation, there's mandates, all sorts of stuff changing all the time. So how can growers look ahead so that they don't get caught off guard? There's probably like 100 questions in there, but you know what I'm asking.
Right, I could go on for the next 3 hours, but and just a simple short answer is that a lot of regions in the country are slowly heading toward what we call like decarbonization or electrification, where they're, we're as a culture, as a people, we're trying to do less burning of fuel to condition our spaces. The newer equipment really is very sophisticated in terms of how it does convert the fuel and how much emissions it gives off. But there is legislation afoot where no gas permits will be given in California past, I think, it fluctuates, but I think it's like the year 2032. If you're building a new facility, you won't be able to get a gas meter. And so, you might be compelled to put in something like a solar thermal system or a heat pump system. Those kinds of things are starting to crop up in different pockets and regions in the country. And so I think good advice when you're looking down the road is any new facilities you should think about using, and this gets a little bit techie, but if you're putting in a hot water system, for instance, which using water is great because whatever the least cost or whatever the best way to make your water hot is what your energy source is. But one of the attributes of these push towards heat pumps and things like that is that generally the supply water temperature can't be as hot as we can make it with a boiler. And so there's a lot of folks that are coming to us that are trying to have, what we call a migration path to the future that'll put in high efficiency boilers today, but they might have us design the system so that it handshakes well with the heat pump down the road. So instead of using a typical supply water temperature to heat a greenhouse of, say, 160 or 180 degrees Fahrenheit, people will design a system to handle the heating loads with 130 degree water, 140 degree water, so that they can pivot down the road and use these alternative heat sources. Things like that are coming along. I think, you're going to see a lot more good decision making with the layering in of AI and control systems, so that they're always using the minimal amount of energy possible while still maintaining the environment real well. Control systems are just getting much more sophisticated. So yeah, those are the kind of things I see out there. Obviously, a lot more mechanization, a lot more, fixation on the carbon footprint, et cetera, of these facilities. We just finished contributing to a study with one of the industry groups to develop a workbook for people contemplating using waste heat from data centers.
Wow. Okay.
That could, the co-location into and we know they're building data centers everywhere, and those things have a lot of excess heat in many cases that can be deployed to condition a greenhouse. So, and all you have to do is kind of look across the pond and see what is happening with our Dutch partners and brothers and sisters over there, where, the cost of natural gas it's like 8 to 10x what we're paying here in this country. So, high efficiency is a big deal.
What's the timeline on the heat pumps? When do you think those are going to be, are going to generate the heat that's needed? I mean, are we talking 5 years, 10 years, 20?
Yeah, there are out there. The problem is that they're probably 5-6 times the cost, and sometimes even more of what are traditional things. So economically, it's very difficult for someone to do unless they get grants or subsidies. So, there is good. I think the development of heat pumps will continue. I just came back from the big air conditioning. It's one of the biggest trade shows in the country, where we saw all the evolution of that. So their capacities are getting bigger. So I think we're looking at a 10-year window where it's going to be more commonplace to see, where it's not going to be just someone who wants to greenwash your facility, but they actually economically it makes sense for them to do that move. But until then, anything they do where they're trying to suppress how hot the water has to be in order to condition the greenhouse will be a really good move, and use one of the typical high efficiency currently available equipment, knowing that you can switch a valve down the road and use something else and not have to change all the infrastructure inside the greenhouse.
Okay. That makes sense. So again, it's thinking ahead, it's planning for the future, but you've got to partner with the right companies that understand what that future is going to look like, which is exactly why you and I are talking today.
That's
so,
right.
Well, thank you so much for your time today, Jim. And before we close, can you let the listeners know where they can find out more about all that BioTherm offers and how to get in touch with your team?
Absolutely. We have an 800 number. It's 800 get heat. It's 800-438-4328. And our website is biothermsolutions.com.
And you guys, how many sales? What's your sales team look like in terms of coverage?
Can
you pretty much get anywhere it's needed?
Anywhere. We have them spread out. We have a sales office in Rhode Island that handles the Northeast and eastern parts of Canada. We have sales office in the Southeast in Charlotte, so we can get around those regions. We are handling the Midwest as well. We have an office in Denver, and then an office in the Northwest in Idaho. And then we're based in Northern California, about 50 miles north of San Francisco. And anybody's welcome to come by and see us anytime. We're in beautiful redwood and wine country.
Awesome. Well, again, I really appreciate your time, Jim. This has been great. I'm glad you let me pick your brain a little bit on the evolution of the industry and also talk about some of these cool new product lines. You've been doing it a long time. You're one of the experts, and it is really good to catch up and learn more.
Thank you very much. Appreciate the good questions and your time.
Awesome. Well, I'm your host, Bill Calkins, and on behalf of our team at Ball Publishing, as well as Jim and the BioTherm team, thanks for listening. Take care out there and have an awesome spring.